In the heart of ancient Egypt, where golden sands met the sacred Nile, destiny chose an unlikely soul. Not within the pharaoh's opulent palace, but amidst the dusty alleys of Thebes, where a young woman fought for survival. Her world was hunger, her currency cunning, until one fateful moment chains of bronze replaced freedom, dragging her into a realm of unimaginable luxury and perilous secrets. A world where power was absolute, love a dangerous game, and every glance held a hidden truth. This is the tale of a spirit untamed, thrust into a gilded cage where impossible choices lay waiting. But tell me, dear listener, as we embark on this epic journey, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what draws you to these grand tapestries of the past, these sweeping period romances that truly captures your heart? Perhaps it's the timeless echo of forbidden desires. Have you ever loved someone you couldn't have? Ancient Egypt, Thebes, year 1350 before the birth of Christ. The first rays of dawn painted the mud-brick hovels of Thebes in shades of amber and gold, but 16-year-old Ankhesenamun saw only opportunity in the awakening shadows. Her bare feet moved silently across the packed earth of the marketplace, emerald eyes scanning the early morning crowd with the practiced precision of a hunter. 8 years of surviving in these unforgiving streets had taught her that the difference between eating and starving often lay in the weight of a merchant's purse and the speed of nimble fingers. The morning air carried the mingled scents of exotic spices, unwashed bodies, and the distant sweetness of the sacred Nile. Vendors called out their wares in voices hoarse from sleep, their words creating a symphony of commerce that had echoed through these ancient streets for countless generations. Ankhesenamun moved through this chaos like a ghost, her torn linen tunic marking her as one of the forgotten, the orphaned, the discarded, the invisible. Her target emerged from the crowd like a gift from the gods themselves. A portly spice merchant, his fingers heavy with rings that caught the morning light, fumbled with a leather pouch that clinked with the promise of copper and silver. His attention was focused on arranging pyramids of saffron and cinnamon, precious commodities that had traveled from distant lands to fill the coffers of those wealthy enough to afford such luxuries. Ankhesenamun approached with the fluid grace of a cat stalking its prey. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her breathing remained steady. This was not mere theft. This was survival, as natural and necessary as drawing breath. She had learned long ago that the world showed no mercy to those who hesitated. The moment arrived like a whisper of fate. As the merchant turned to greet a potential customer, Ankhesenamun's fingers danced toward the leather pouch with movements refined by years of desperate practice. The weight of coins filled her palm for one glorious instant before the merchant's meaty hand clamped down on her wrist with the force of a bronze manacle. "Thief!" The word exploded from his lips like a curse from the underworld. "Guards, seize this street rat!" The marketplace erupted into chaos. Vendors shouted, customers scattered, and through the mayhem came the rhythmic thunder of sandaled feet against stone. Royal guards, their bronze armor gleaming like the scales of some mythical beast, descended upon the scene with military precision. Ankhesenamun's world tilted on its axis as rough hands seized her arms, and cold metal shackles closed around her wrists with a finality that echoed through her very soul. "Another one for the palace," growled the captain of the guard, his scarred face impassive as he surveyed his captive. "The pharaoh's household requires fresh servants, and this one looks strong enough to survive the training." Udil! As they dragged her through the streets, Ankhesenamun caught her first glimpse of the royal palace, rising from the desert like a vision from the realm of the gods. Golden spires pierced the azure sky, their surfaces catching the morning light and throwing it back in brilliant cascades that seemed to mock her shackled state. Massive limestone walls stretched toward the heavens, carved with hieroglyphs that told stories of divine kings and eternal glory. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined that these walls would one day bow to her will. The transition from the squalid streets to the palace's outer courtyards struck her like a physical blow. Her bare feet, accustomed to rough stone and packed earth, now touched polished limestone, so smooth it seemed to flow like water beneath her soles. Towering columns rose around her like the legs of giants, their surfaces adorned with painted murals depicting gods and goddesses in all their terrible beauty. The very air seemed different here, cleaner, perfumed with incense and exotic flowers, heavy with the weight of power and ancient secrets. Ankhesenamun and a dozen other captured girls were herded into a vast bathing chamber where steam rose from pools of heated water like offerings to invisible deities. Servants moved with practiced efficiency, stripping away the rags of their former lives and scrubbing years of street grime from trembling bodies. The contrast between her torn tunic and the silk hangings that adorned the walls served as a stark reminder of the chasm that separated her world from this realm of unimaginable luxury. It was during this ritual cleansing that Queen Tai made her entrance, and the very atmosphere seemed to shift in response to her presence. The queen moved with the fluid grace of the Nile itself, her dark skin gleaming like polished ebony, her eyes holding depths that spoke of wisdom earned through years of navigating the treacherous currents of palace politics. Born of Nubian nobility and elevated through a strategic marriage that had strengthened Egypt's southern borders, she commanded respect through intelligence rather than fear. As Taye's gaze swept over the assembled girls, most cowered beneath the weight of royal attention. But Ankhesenamun stood tall, her chin raised in unconscious defiance, emerald eyes meeting the queen's dark stare with a boldness that should have earned her immediate punishment. Instead, something flickered in Tia's expression, recognition, perhaps, or the stirring of long-buried memories. "This one," the queen murmured, her voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to being obeyed without question. But as her eyes fell upon the distinctive ankh-shaped birthmark adorning Ankhesenamun's right shoulder, her composure cracked for the briefest instant. A sharp intake of breath, quickly concealed, betrayed emotions too complex for the watching servants to decipher. The queen's fingers trembled almost imperceptibly as she gestured for Kayamwaset to approach. The elderly Nubian scribe moved with the careful steps of one whose body bore the weight of too many years and too many secrets. His weathered hands, stained with decades of ink and knowledge, reached toward the birthmark as if drawn by some invisible force. "The lost daughter returns," he whispered in ancient Nubian, his voice barely audible above the splash of water and the rustle of silk. The words hung in the air like incense, heavy with meaning that none but he and the queen could fully comprehend. Tie's warning glance silenced him before he could say more, but the seed of recognition had been planted in soil that had waited 50 years to bear fruit. "She will serve in my personal chambers," the queen declared, her voice steady once more. "See that she is properly trained in the arts befitting a royal servant." The days that followed blurred together in a kaleidoscope of new experiences and harsh lessons. Ankhesenamun discovered that her street-honed instincts for reading people and situations translated remarkably well to the intricate dance of palace politics. She learned that information was indeed currency in this golden cage, and that knowledge could be more valuable than the finest jewels. Her intelligence became apparent with startling swiftness. While other servants struggled with the basics of palace protocol, Ankhesenamun absorbed hieroglyphic writing simply by observing the scribes at their work. Her mind, sharpened by years of survival, grasped the subtle nuances of court etiquette with an ease that both impressed and unsettled her instructors. It was during these early days that Captain Katie first took notice of her. The 25-year-old commander of the palace guard possessed the kind of quiet strength that came from years of military discipline, his bronze skin bearing the scars of battles fought in service to the crown. There was something in the way Ankhesenamun moved through her duties, a natural grace that seemed at odds with her humble origins, that caught his attention and held it. More intriguing still were the melodies she hummed while working, haunting Nubian lullabies that stirred something deep within his carefully guarded memories. He found himself lingering in corridors where she might pass, drawn by music that spoke to a part of his soul he had long thought buried beneath layers of Egyptian loyalty and military duty. The moment that would change everything arrived during the festival of the divine birth, when all of Thebes gathered to honor the god Amun-Ra in his most sacred aspect. The palace courtyard blazed with the light of 1,000 oil lamps, their flames dancing like captured stars against the backdrop of night. Priests moved through the ceremony with practiced solemnity, their voices rising and falling in ancient chants that had echoed through these halls since the dawn of the kingdom. Ankhesenamun stood among the servants lining the walls, her role to remain invisible while the great ones of the realm paid homage to their divine patron. In her hands, she carried a precious alabaster vessel filled with myrrh oil, its contents worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. The oil's sweet, resinous scent filled her nostrils as she watched Pharaoh Amenhotep III make his stately progress through the ceremony. The pharaoh commanded attention without effort, his presence filling the vast space like the voice of thunder across the desert. At 45 years of age, he possessed the kind of mature authority that came from decades of absolute power. Yet there was something in his dark eyes that spoke of a loneliness that all the gold in Egypt could not cure. His ceremonial robes, woven with threads of gold and adorned with precious stones, caught the lamplight and threw it back in brilliant cascades that seemed to make him glow with divine radiance. It was then that fate chose to intervene with the cruel humor of the gods themselves. A stumble, a moment of lost balance, and the precious myrrh oil arced through the air like liquid amber before splashing across the pharaoh's pristine robes. The courtyard fell silent as death, every breath held in anticipation of the royal wrath that must surely follow such sacrilege. But instead of the expected fury, Ankhesenamun found herself looking directly into the pharaoh's eyes, a breach of protocol so severe it should have resulted in immediate and brutal punishment. Yet something in her emerald gaze seemed to arrest his attention, holding him captive in a moment that stretched like eternity between heartbeats. "Forgive me, Divine One," she whispered, her voice steady despite the terror that should have rendered her speechless. "My clumsiness has stained your sacred garments." The silence stretched on, pregnant with possibilities that none dared voice aloud. Then, impossibly, the corners of the pharaoh's mouth lifted in the ghost of a smile. "Perhaps the gods have their own purposes," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtyard. "See that this servant is not punished for what may have been divine will." From the shadows at the edge of the courtyard, High Priest Amenhotep watched this exchange with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. At 55 years of age, he had spent decades accumulating power through careful manipulation and ruthless elimination of threats to his authority. The sight of a mere slave girl capturing the pharaoh's attention sent warning bells clanging through his calculating mind. The priest's gaunt frame seemed to blend with the darkness as he observed the way the pharaoh's gaze lingered on the girl, noting the subtle shift in the royal demeanor that spoke of interest far beyond mere mercy. This development required immediate action, a demonstration that would eliminate the threat while appearing to be nothing more than unfortunate accident. As the ceremony concluded and the courtyard began to empty, Amenhotep moved with the fluid grace of a serpent striking its prey. A whispered word to a trusted servant, a small vial of clear liquid passed from hand to hand, and the trap was set. The pharaoh's evening wine would carry more than the usual blessing of the grape. It would carry the kiss of deadly nightshade, and suspicion would naturally fall upon the clumsy slave girl, who had already proven herself capable of disrupting royal dignity. The evening meal proceeded with its usual elaborate ritual, course following course in a display of abundance that would have fed half of Thebes. Ankhesenamun moved through her duties with newfound awareness, conscious that every eye in the hall seemed to track her movements with unusual intensity. The weight of the pharaoh's earlier mercy pressed upon her shoulders like a golden chain, beautiful but binding. It was, as she approached with the ceremonial wine cup, that the scent hit her, subtle beneath the rich aroma of fermented grapes, but unmistakable to one who had learned the properties of every plant that grew wild in the streets of Thebes. Her mother's voice echoed across the years, teaching her daughter which herbs could heal and which could kill, knowledge passed down through generations of women who had survived by understanding the hidden powers of the natural world. "My lord," she said, her voice cutting through the gentle murmur of conversation like a blade through silk. "Perhaps you would prefer fresh wine. This cup carries an unusual fragrance." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and for a moment that seemed to last forever, the fate of kingdoms balanced on the edge of a knife. Then the pharaoh's eyes met hers once more, and in their depths she saw not anger, but a dawning understanding that would change both their lives forever. Guards swarmed the hall like angry wasps, seizing the wine cup and subjecting it to immediate examination. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough, but somehow the trail of guilt seemed to evaporate like morning mist before the desert sun. Amenhotep stood among the concerned courtiers, his face a mask of appropriate shock and outrage, while his mind raced to calculate the implications of this unexpected development. The slave girl was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Her intervention had not only saved the pharaoh's life, but had also demonstrated an intelligence and knowledge that marked her as a threat to be taken seriously. As he watched her being escorted from the hall under guard, for her own protection, the pharaoh had declared, Amenhotep began planning his next move in a game that had suddenly become far more complex. Hours later, alone in the small chamber that had been assigned to her, Ankhesenamun sat on the edge of her narrow bed and traced the outline of her birthmark with trembling fingers. The events of the day swirled through her mind, like leaves caught in a whirlwind, each moment pregnant with implications she was only beginning to understand. Outside her door, Queen Tai stood in the shadows of the corridor, her own thoughts churning with possibilities that had lain dormant for half a century. The girl's intervention tonight had been more than mere luck or knowledge. It had been the first move in a game that would determine the fate of two kingdoms. As she turned away from the door, her decision crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. The lost daughter had indeed returned, and with her came the promise of either redemption or revolution. In the darkness of her chamber, Ankhesenamun touched her birthmark one final time and whispered the question that would haunt her dreams. Who am I really? And why do I feel like I've been waiting my entire life for this moment to begin? The answer would come sooner than she dared hope, and with it, a destiny that would shake the very foundations of the ancient world. But tonight, she was still just a slave girl with emerald eyes and dangerous knowledge, unaware that the blood of queens flowed through her veins, and that the gods themselves had marked her for greatness. In the silence of the palace, the wheels of fate began their inexorable turn, and the girl who had saved a pharaoh's life would soon discover that some chains are forged not of bronze, but of destiny itself. 6 months had transformed the frightened street girl into something altogether more dangerous, a woman who moved through the pharaoh's private chambers with the fluid grace of one born to power, though she remained unaware of the truth that pulsed through her very veins. The evening ritual had become as essential to Amenhotep III as the rising of the sun itself. the moment when the weight of kingship lifted from his shoulders, and he could simply be a man in conversation with the most intriguing mind he had ever encountered. The royal chambers glowed with the warm light of dozens of oil lamps, their flames casting dancing shadows across walls, adorned with murals depicting the eternal journey of the sun god through the underworld. Golden vessels caught the light and threw it back in brilliant cascades, while silk hangings in deep blues and rich purples created an atmosphere of intimate luxury that few mortals would ever witness. Here, in this sanctuary of power, the most powerful man in the known world found himself eagerly awaiting the arrival of a servant whose insights had begun to reshape his understanding of governance itself. Ankhesenamun entered carrying a tray of delicacies: honeyed figs, roasted duck glazed with precious spices, wine that had aged in amphoras sealed with the mark of the finest vineyards along the Nile. But both knew that sustenance for the body was merely an excuse for the feast of minds that would follow. Her emerald eyes met his dark gaze with a boldness that should have been impossible for one of her station, yet had become as natural as breathing in these stolen hours when protocol dissolved like morning mist. "Tell me, my lord," she said, settling gracefully onto the cushions arranged near his couch. "What troubles weigh upon the divine shoulders tonight? I see shadows in the royal countenance that speak of more than mere fatigue." The pharaoh's lips curved in a smile that transformed his austere features into something almost boyish. "You read me too well, little serpent. The governors of the southern provinces grow restless, demanding greater autonomy while simultaneously requesting more troops to maintain order. They want the benefits of Egyptian protection without the responsibilities of Egyptian law. Perhaps, Ankhesenamun mused, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the silk cushion, the problem lies not in their demands, but in our approach. A wise ruler knows when to hold tight and when to allow the reins to slacken. Sometimes the appearance of freedom can be more binding than the heaviest chains. Her words carried a weight that seemed to surprise even her, and Amenhotep found himself leaning forward, captivated by the political acumen that emerged so naturally from lips that should have spoken only of domestic concerns. These conversations had evolved far beyond palace gossip into discussions of philosophy and statecraft that challenged his most fundamental assumptions about power and governance. The attraction that had been building between them was like the slow rise of the Nile during flood season. Inevitable, powerful, and transformative. It lived in the space between words, in the electric moment when their hands accidentally touched as she poured his wine, in the way her breath caught when he praised her insights with genuine admiration. Amenhotep, married for political alliance to a woman who shared his bed but not his thoughts, found himself drawn to Ankhesenamun's combination of intelligence and untamed spirit, like a desert wanderer drawn to an oasis. She represented everything his structured royal life lacked: spontaneity that could shift from serious discourse to playful banter in a heartbeat, genuine emotion that colored every word she spoke, and a fearless honesty that cut through the layers of flattery and deception that surrounded him like armor. In her presence, he was not the divine pharaoh, but simply a man hungry for authentic connection. It was during one of these intimate evenings that a messenger arrived bearing news that would shatter the carefully constructed world they had built within these chamber walls. The scroll he carried bore the seal of the archaeological expedition that had been excavating a newly discovered Nubian temple, and its contents would prove more explosive than any weapon ever forged in the royal armories. The hieroglyphic records spoke of a marriage alliance between Egypt and the Kingdom of Kush 50 years prior, a political union designed to strengthen the southern borders and create lasting peace between the two great powers. Among the artifacts recovered was a golden amulet bearing the exact likeness of an ankh-shaped birthmark, along with detailed references to a Princess Ankhesenamun who had mysteriously vanished after the ceremonial wedding. leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. When the excavation report reached the palace, it sent shockwaves through those who understood its true significance. Queen Tia, reading the document in her private chambers, felt the blood drain from her face as memories she had carefully buried for decades came rushing back with the force of a desert storm. Across the palace, Ankhesenamun's weathered hands trembled as he absorbed the implications of discoveries that validated everything he had spent his life protecting and documenting. High Priest Amenhotep, studying the report with the calculating mind of a master strategist, began to understand the true scope of the threat he faced. This was no mere slave girl who had caught the pharaoh's fancy. This was potentially the heir to a bloodline that could challenge the very foundations of Egyptian supremacy in the region. The revelation came to Ankhesenamun not through official channels, but in the hushed intimacy of Queen Tia's private chambers, where silk hangings muffled sound, and the air was heavy with the scent of frankincense and secrets too dangerous for ordinary ears. The queen moved with the careful precision of one who had spent decades walking the razor's edge between truth and survival, her dark eyes reflecting depths of knowledge that had been carefully hidden beneath layers of political necessity. "Sit, child," Tia commanded, her voice carrying undertones that spoke of momentous revelations to come. "The time has come for you to understand the truth of what you are and why the gods brought you to this place at this moment in history." The words that followed struck Ankhesenamun like physical blows, each revelation reshaping her understanding of herself and her place in the world. Queen T spoke of networks and bloodlines, of careful planning that had spanned generations, of a destiny that had been waiting patiently for the right moment to unfold. "I have been preparing you for this since the day you arrived," the queen confessed, producing documents that had been hidden for decades in secret compartments known only to the most trusted allies. Every lesson, every opportunity, every moment of protection has been leading to this revelation. You are not merely a slave who caught the pharaoh's attention. You are the living embodiment of a promise made 50 years ago, a bridge between two great kingdoms that could reshape the balance of power in the ancient world. The underground network that Ankhesenamun discovered was far more extensive and sophisticated than anything she could have imagined. Led by Ankhesenamun, but secretly funded and protected by Queen Tia herself, dozens of Nubian descendants had maintained their cultural identity and royal bloodlines, while carefully documenting injustices and preparing for the day when their true heritage could be safely revealed. Ankhesenamun's story, when finally told in its entirety, painted a picture of loyalty and sacrifice that spanned decades. He had been personal secretary to the original Princess Ankhesenamun, witness to her murder by Amenhotep's predecessor, who had feared the growing Nubian influence in court. Spared because of his invaluable knowledge of mathematics and astronomy, he had spent the intervening years creating an intricate web of documentation and protection that would ensure the princess's bloodline survived to claim its rightful place. It was during this period of revelations that Captain Katie began showing subtle signs of his own hidden heritage. Their friendship had deepened through shared moments in the palace gardens, where the scent of lotus blossoms provided a backdrop for conversations that grew increasingly personal and meaningful. His knowledge of Nubian military tactics, his fluency in dialects that should have been foreign to an Egyptian soldier, and his unusual emotional reactions to stories of Nubian oppression all pointed to secrets buried beneath layers of carefully constructed identity. The most telling moment came when Ankhesenamun, lost in thought while tending to her duties, began humming one of her mother's lullabies. The haunting melody drifted through the corridor like a ghost from the past, and Katie's voice unconsciously joined hers in harmonies that spoke of shared memories and common roots. The realization that these songs were part of his own buried past created a moment of connection so profound that both fell silent, overwhelmed by implications neither was ready to fully explore. The growing attraction between Ankhesenamun and the pharaoh reached its inevitable culmination on a night when the boundaries between servant and master, between political necessity and personal desire, finally dissolved like salt in water. Their first night together was a symphony of whispered confessions and gentle caresses, of souls recognizing their perfect complement in the other. Yet even as they found solace in each other's arms, the shadow of political implications hung over their intimacy, like a sword suspended by the finest thread. Amenhotep's response to these developments was swift and merciless. The high priest, now fully aware that Ankhesenamun posed an existential threat to his carefully constructed power base, began a systematic campaign designed to destroy her influence before it could grow beyond containment. Spies appeared among the servants like poisonous flowers, spreading whispers about her unnatural hold over the pharaoh, and suggesting that dark magic was the only explanation for her rapid rise from slavery to favor. The priest's network of traditional Egyptian nobles, already nervous about the increasing prominence of Nubian voices in court, proved fertile ground for his campaign of fear and suspicion. He painted vivid pictures of Egyptian supremacy being undermined by foreign influence, of ancient traditions being swept away by dangerous innovations that threatened the very foundations of their civilization. The crisis that would force all hidden truths into the harsh light of day came in the form of a pregnancy scare that sent shockwaves through every level of palace hierarchy. Though the alarm proved false, the mere possibility of a slave bearing the pharaoh's heir threatened to shatter the carefully maintained succession structure that had governed Egypt for centuries. Nobles, who had previously viewed Ankhesenamun as an amusing diversion, suddenly saw her as a direct threat to their own children's inheritance, while priests proclaimed that the gods themselves would curse any union that violated the sacred order of royal bloodlines. The confrontation that would change everything came on a night when the desert wind howled through the palace corridors like the voice of angry spirits. Amenhotep summoned Ankhesenamun to his chambers, where the archaeological evidence lay spread across a table like pieces of a puzzle that had finally been assembled into a picture of stunning clarity. The golden amulet caught the lamplight and seemed to pulse with life, its ankh shape a perfect mirror of the mark that adorned her shoulder. "Tell me," the pharaoh said, his voice carefully controlled despite the emotions that raged beneath the surface, "what you know of your true heritage. The time for secrets has passed, and the future of two kingdoms may hang in the balance of your answer." The revelation scene that followed was charged with emotions too powerful for mere words to contain. Ankhesenamun's world tilted on its axis as she grappled with implications that stretched far beyond her personal identity to encompass the fate of nations. But even as she struggled to process the magnitude of her true heritage, Queen Tai's presence in the shadows reminded her that this moment had been decades in the making, that powerful allies had been preparing for this revelation since before her birth. As the weight of destiny settled upon her shoulders like a mantle woven from starlight and shadow, Ankhesenamun realized that she was no longer fighting merely for survival, but potentially for a throne that might rightfully be hers. The blood of queens flowed through her veins, and with it came responsibilities that would either elevate her to heights beyond imagination or destroy her utterly. In the silence that followed these earth-shattering revelations, she touched the birthmark that had marked her as different from birth and whispered the words that would echo through the ages. "If the gods have written my name in the stars, then let the heavens themselves bear witness to what I shall become." The die had been cast, and there could be no turning back from the path that stretched ahead, a path that would lead either to the crown of two kingdoms or to a grave that would hold the dreams of generations yet unborn. The golden light of Ra, usually a beacon of strength and unchallenged authority, now seemed to cast longer, more treacherous shadows across the polished floors of the palace. 6 months had passed since the revelation in Amenhotep's chambers, 6 months during which Ankhesenamun had embraced her destiny with a fire that surprised even Queen Tiye, her tireless mentor. Armed with the knowledge of her royal lineage and the intricate support network meticulously woven by Tiye and Kaimuset, Ankhesenamun began her delicate dance within the viper's nest of court politics. Her days were now a finely tuned symphony of observation, subtle influence, and clandestine operations. During their nightly philosophical discussions, as the pharaoh reclined, she would artfully steer their conversations towards the suffering of the Nubian laborers in the southern mines, the unfair trade tariffs that stifled Kushite merchants, or the brutal efficiency of the palace's slave system. Her suggestions, veiled as innocent inquiries or compassionate musings, were seeds planted in fertile ground. Amenhotep, captivated by her unique blend of sharp intellect and genuine empathy, often found himself agreeing to minor policy adjustments that, unbeknownst to him, slowly but surely began to chip away at the foundations of centuries-old oppression. Her whispers were reshaping the very fabric of the kingdom, one gentle suggestion at a time. Yet even as her influence expanded, so too did the emotional complexities of her life. Captain Katie, his devotion to her growing with each passing day, became an anchor in the turbulent sea of palace intrigue. He remained unaware of her nocturnal visits to the pharaoh's private chambers, unaware of the intimate connection that bound her to the ruler he served with unwavering loyalty. Their stolen moments in the quiet solitude of the palace gardens, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight or the first blush of dawn, became a bittersweet balm to her soul. He represented a love untainted by ambition, a life she sometimes yearned for with a fierce ache in her heart. One evening, as they walked beneath the fragrant jasmine trellises, Ankhesenamun found herself humming a forgotten Nubian lullaby, a melody her mother had sung to her as a child. Katie, his usually disciplined posture relaxed, his eyes fixed on the distant stars, unconsciously joined in. His voice, a low, resonant baritone, wove through hers in perfect harmony. It was then, in that moment of shared, unspoken connection, that Katie's carefully constructed walls began to crumble. He stopped humming, his gaze dropping to the ground, a shadow passing over his face. "My mother sang that to me," he murmured, his voice thick with a vulnerability Ankhesenamun had never witnessed. Before the Egyptian soldiers found me, she told me to forget, to hide, said I could never be truly Egyptian if they knew." He looked at her then, his eyes a tormented pool of brown. "They told me I was abandoned. Said she died trying to escape across the desert, but sometimes I remember more. Songs, stories, a language that sounds like water flowing over stones." His voice faded, leaving a palpable silence between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Ankhesenamun's heart ached for the boy he had been, for the heritage he had been forced to bury. His confession was not just a revelation of his past, but a profound mirroring of her own secret pain, forging a bond between them deeper than any she had yet known, a bond that threatened to unravel her carefully guarded composure. While Ankhesenamun navigated the treacherous currents of the pharaoh's affections and Katie's burgeoning love, High Priest Amenhotep, his senses finely attuned to the shifting winds of power, launched his counterattack. His gaunt frame seemed to blend into the shadows of the temple as he convened secret meetings with displaced Egyptian nobles, men whose fortunes and influence had waned under the pharaoh's increasingly liberal rule. He painted Ankhesenamun as a seductive foreign sorceress, whispering about her unnatural hold over the Divine One, planting seeds of fear that Egyptian traditions were being defiled by Nubian darkness. Simultaneously, Amenhotep began a relentless investigation into the true origins of Ankhesenamun. He assigned his most ruthless agents to dig into the past, specifically the vanishing of the original princess Ankhesenamun 50 years prior. His research brought him dangerously close to uncovering Queen Tiye's decades-long efforts to protect the Nubian bloodline. He realized with growing alarm that this was no random slave girl. This was a calculated, deliberate threat to everything he held sacred: power, tradition, and the absolute dominance of the Egyptian priestly class. The underground network of Nubian slaves, now working under Ankhesenamun's clandestine guidance, grew bolder. What had once been isolated acts of quiet defiance blossomed into a sophisticated resistance movement. Using her position, Ankhesenamun began diverting palace resources, food, clothing, medicinal supplies, to hidden safe houses, facilitating escapes along secret routes known only to Kamwaset and his most trusted operatives. This wasn't merely spontaneous rebellion, it was the precise, painstaking culmination of Queen Tiye's lifelong mission, with Ankhesenamun emerging as the unlikely yet perfect catalyst. She was the fire that Tiye had carefully nurtured for generations. It was during this period of intense clandestine activity that Kamwaset presented Ankhesenamun with a devastating truth. Through meticulous research in the royal archives, painstakingly pieced together from fragmented records and hushed whispers, he revealed the mystery of her father. Her unknown Egyptian father, a minor noble named Yuya, with connections to the royal court, had not simply vanished. He had been murdered by agents loyal to Amenhotep's predecessor, a zealous high priest consumed by fear of Nubian influence. Yuya's crime: falling in love with and secretly supporting the direct descendant of the lost Nubian princess. This revelation added a searing layer of personal vendetta to Ankhesenamun's political struggle, transforming the fight for her people into a sacred act of vengeance for her parents. The stakes escalated dramatically as the revered festival of Opet approached. Amenhotep, now fully convinced of Ankhesenamun's danger and increasingly desperate, orchestrated his most ambitious and lethal plot. He planned a sophisticated assassination of Pharaoh Amenhotep, using poisoned ceremonial wine during the festival's most sacred ritual. This time, his plan was twofold. Not only would he frame Ankhesenamun for the murder, thus eliminating the rising Nubian threat, but he would also eliminate Queen Tiye, having discovered the extent of her involvement in the Nubian network and her long game of protecting the royal bloodline. The festival of Opet, a time of joyous celebration and renewal, would become a stage for unspeakable tragedy and a ruthless power grab. Meanwhile, Katie's internal struggle had reached a boiling point. The fragments of his past, stirred by Ankhesenamun's innocent lullabies, had coalesced into a full awakening. He remembered his mother's terrified whispers, her desperate plea for him to forget, his forced adoption into the rigid discipline of Egyptian military life. He recalled his conscious decision to bury his identity, to become the perfect Egyptian soldier, rising through the ranks to serve the pharaoh. But now, confronted by Ankhesenamun's unwavering courage and the stark injustices he witnessed daily, the internal conflict between his loyalty to Egypt and the undeniable pull of his Nubian blood became unbearable. He knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he could no longer remain silent. He had to choose which side of himself would truly define him. The day of the festival of Opet dawned under a sky of blinding blue, deceptively serene. The palace courtyard pulsed with the energy of thousands of celebrants, a kaleidoscope of vibrant colors, the air thick with incense and the joyous clamor of the crowd. Ankhesenamun moved through the throng, her senses heightened, every nerve alert. She knew Amenhotep would strike. She also knew that this festival, meant to honor the gods, was her last, best chance to expose the high priest and to publicly claim her truth. As the ceremony reached its crescendo and the pharaoh prepared to partake of the ceremonial wine, a hushed reverence fell over the crowd. Ankhesenamun, positioned near the royal dais, saw the glint of malice in Amenhotep's eyes as he gestured to a cloaked servant carrying the poisoned chalice. Her heart hammered, but her resolve was diamond hard. Just as the servant stepped forward, Ankhesenamun, his voice trembling but clear, stepped onto a raised platform beside the dais. "Hear ye, loyal subjects of Egypt," Ankhesenamun's voice, amplified by the sudden silence, rang through the courtyard. "Hear the truth that has been buried for 50 years. With a dramatic flourish, he unfurled a scroll, its ancient hieroglyphs detailing the long-forgotten murder of the original princess Ankhesenamun, systematically revealing the corruption and fear that had led to her demise. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the scribe connected the dots, drawing a direct, damning parallel to the current high priest's own machinations. Amenhotep, caught off guard, roared with fury, attempting to silence Ankhesenamun. But it was too late. Seizing the moment, Ankhesenamun moved. Instead of fleeing or trying to stop the assassination directly, she stepped forward onto the dais, placing herself beside the pharaoh, her emerald eyes blazing with righteous fury. In a voice that, though soft, somehow carried through the hushed courtyard, she declared, "I am Ankhesenamun, descendant of Cush, daughter of Uya, and my blood runs with the truth of this stolen legacy." She raised her arm, revealing the ankh-shaped birthmark on her shoulder, a living testament to the history Ankhesenamun had just unveiled. A wave of stunned silence washed over the crowd, followed by a confused murmur that swelled into a roar. Then Queen T, majestic and regal, walked to Ankhesenamun's side, placing a hand on her shoulder. Her voice, clear and unwavering, confirmed every word, revealing the decades of preparation and documentation that proved Ankhesenamun's legitimacy. "The gods have delivered their chosen one," Tia proclaimed, her words reverberating through the vast courtyard. The kingdom erupted. The meticulously planned festival of Opet devolved into a political earthquake. Pharaoh Amenhotep, his face a mask of shock, found himself caught between the crumbling facade of his loyal high priest and the undeniable force of a royal revelation. But the chaos was not yet complete. From the ranks of the pharaoh's own guard, Captain Kiti, his heart pounding with a fierce mixture of terror and liberation, stepped forward. His voice, strong and resolute, cut through the din. "I, Kiti, son of Nubia, declare my loyalty to the rightful claim of Princess Ankhesenamun." His public declaration of his own Nubian heritage, an act of unimaginable courage, rippled through the assembled forces, inspiring other mixed heritage nobles and soldiers to step forward, their faces etched with a dawning hope. The pharaoh, caught in the eye of this swirling storm, watched as the very foundations of his power began to crack. The people looked on, mouths agape, as the forces of tradition clashed with the undeniable truth that now stood before them. Amenhotep knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the choice was no longer his alone. He would have to choose between the love that had transformed his lonely life and the stability of a kingdom now plunged into disarray as various factions began to choose sides for the coming war. The crown of Egypt hung suspended by a thread, its fate dependent on the next move in this dangerous ancient game. The aftermath of Ankhesenamun's declaration at the festival of Opet plunged the kingdom into a maelstrom of uncertainty, ripping apart the illusion of ancient stability. Egypt found itself cleaved into three distinct, volatile factions. On one side stood the traditional Egyptian nobles, their faces etched with a fear of change, rallying behind High Priest Amenhotep and his desperate cries of sacrilege and foreign infiltration. They clung fiercely to the old ways, to the purity of their bloodlines, and to the power they had always wielded. On another side were the progressive elements of the court, a surprising number of whom, encouraged by Pharaoh Amenhotep's quiet support, now openly championed his right to choose his consort, regardless of origin, and who saw in Ankhesenamun a vibrant new future for Egypt. The third, a burgeoning Nubian independence movement spurred by Ankhesenamun's revelations and Kati's courageous declaration, rallied behind Ankhesenamun's royal claims, dreaming of a free and reunited Kush. But a fourth faction, born from the very chaos of the festival, began to emerge. It was formed by the unexpected revelation of multiple mixed-heritage nobles and soldiers, emboldened by Katie's fearless example. These individuals, long forced to conceal their Nubian lineage, now stepped forward, their voices trembling with newfound pride. They were not seeking separation, but integration, a true melding of cultures that would strengthen both Egypt and Nubia, a bridge built on shared blood and common purpose. Their existence, once a whispered secret, now became a powerful, undeniable force. The stage was set for the trial of heritage, a formal court proceeding demanded by Amenhotep but embraced by Queen Tia as the ultimate proving ground. It was to be a spectacle unlike any seen in generations, a grand inquiry into history, blood, and destiny. The great hall of Maat, usually reserved for matters of law and justice, was transformed into a crucible of truth. Dignitaries from across Egypt, and even a few wary envoys from distant Nubian territories, gathered, their eyes fixed on Ankhesenamun as she stood, poised and serene, before the uraeus-crested judgment seat. Amenhotep, stoic and unwavering, was the first to present his evidence. With trembling, ink-stained hands, he unrolled meticulously preserved papyrus scrolls, each one a testament to his decades-long dedication. His voice, usually a quiet murmur, resonated with the weight of generations as he recounted the hidden history. Detailed genealogies tracing Ankhesenamun's lineage directly back to the original Princess Ankhesenamun, marriage contracts signed by ancient pharaohs, and land deeds exchanged between the two kingdoms. He presented proof that the alliance, forged in peace and strengthened by blood, had been brutally severed by Amenhotep's predecessor, an ambitious high priest who feared Nubian influence. Next, Queen Tia, her regal presence commanding the hall's absolute attention, stepped forward. Her testimony was not just of documents, but of lived experience. With a voice that carried the authority of decades spent navigating the treacherous currents of the court, she spoke of the secret network, confirming Amenhotep's account of its purpose and its protection. She revealed how she had, for 50 long years, nurtured the hope that one day a descendant of that stolen lineage would return. Her eyes, filled with a profound blend of wisdom and quiet triumph, met Ankhesenamun's, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. It was a powerful emotional display, solidifying the legitimacy of Ankhesenamun's claims. Finally, the archaeological evidence from the newly discovered Nubian temple was unveiled. Fragments of a golden amulet, identical in its ankh-shaped design to the birthmark on Ankhesenamun's shoulder, were presented alongside hieroglyphic tablets that detailed the full marriage alliance and the subsequent disappearance of the first princess. The cumulative weight of this evidence was irrefutable, painting a devastating picture of historical injustice and proving beyond doubt the royal blood flowing through Ankhesenamun's veins. The proceedings laid bare not only her royal status, but also the systemic deception that had for so long obscured it. Desperate to maintain his crumbling hold on power, Amenhotep launched his final desperate gambit. He secretly dispatched envoys to the last remaining holdouts of the Nubian separatist movement, promising them complete independence and vast wealth if they would publicly denounce Ankhesenamun as a false claimant, a puppet of Egyptian ambition. He believed their hatred for Egyptian rule would blind them to his duplicity. However, his desperation led to his fatal error. During a tense late-night meeting with these Nubian leaders, Amenhotep, in a fit of arrogant overconfidence, boasted of his predecessor's cunning in orchestrating the original Princess Ankhesenamun's murder, detailing the precise methods used to ensure her disappearance. He inadvertently revealed his intimate knowledge of the crime and, by extension, his own role in covering up this historical atrocity. The Nubian leaders, disgusted by his callousness and realizing they were merely pawns in his power struggle, immediately took his confession to the pharaoh's court, destroying Amenemhet's credibility and exposing the raw corruption at the heart of the traditional power structure he represented. The political landscape had shifted so dramatically that any ultimatum Amenhotep might have considered giving Ankhesenamun became moot. The evidence presented at the trial of heritage had made her royal status undeniable, and public opinion, swayed by the sheer weight of proof and the emotional impact of her story, had turned overwhelmingly in her favor. Her right to a place of power was now a divine mandate, recognized by the people, the courts, and most importantly, by the ancestors themselves. Captain Katie, having fully embraced his Nubian heritage, recognized this moment as his true destiny. He had walked through the fire of self-discovery, confronting the buried memories of his past, and now he stood resolute. He publicly declared his complete support for Ankhesenamun's cause, not as a soldier bound by duty, but as a man of his word, a bridge between the Egyptian military and the Nubian community. His act of courage ignited a wave of similar revelations from other mixed heritage nobles and soldiers. One by one, men and women who had hidden their dual identities stepped forward, creating a powerful coalition that could no longer be ignored or suppressed. It was a silent revolution, fought not with swords, but with truth and heritage. Ankhesenamun, now the undisputed princess of both Egypt and Kush by right of blood and popular acclaim, appeared to accept Pharaoh Amenhotep's marriage proposal with joyful anticipation. Elaborate wedding preparations began, a dazzling display of opulence that captivated the entire kingdom. But beneath the surface of glittering gold and flowing linen, a far more significant operation was underway. Ankhesenamun, with the unwavering assistance of Queen Taye, Kaimwaset, and the newly awakened Katie, used the logistical complexities of the ceremony as a perfect cover to orchestrate the largest slave liberation in Egyptian history. Under the guise of transporting ceremonial goods and noble entourages, convoys of freed slaves were systematically moved along prearranged routes. The wedding gifts were often filled with supplies for their journey, and the guest lists were, in reality, manifests of those seeking passage to freedom. This massive operation not only freed thousands of enslaved Nubians and Egyptians, but also, through carefully negotiated agreements with the newly recognized Nubian kingdoms, transformed their liberation into legitimate repatriation. It was a wedding that truly married two peoples, not just two individuals. In a private moment, just before the ceremony, Amenhotep revealed a truth that deepened Ankhesenamun's love for him immeasurably. He confessed that he had known about her liberation activities all along, choosing to observe and, at times, discreetly facilitate her efforts. His love for her had transcended possessive desire, evolving into profound respect for her unwavering principles and her fierce determination to right historical wrongs. "My heart," he whispered, tracing the ankh on her shoulder, "you did not just save my life, you saved my soul. You showed me the true path of a pharaoh. I have been secretly working with Queen Taye to reform Egyptian policies, to prepare the soil for the seeds of justice you have planted. Our marriage will not just be a union of two hearts, but the formal beginning of a new era of Egyptian-Nubian cooperation, a true domination of peace, not conquest." The wedding ceremony itself transcended all expectations, becoming a true coronation revolution. It was a spectacle of unprecedented grandeur, a majestic fusion of Egyptian and Nubian royal traditions that had for so long been kept separate. Ankhesenamun, adorned in the traditional robes of both queens, became not just queen consort, but co-ruler, with specific authority over Nubian affairs and integration policies for all freed peoples. The ceremony included the formal recognition of mixed heritage nobles as legitimate members of the court, their dual heritage celebrated rather than hidden, establishing a new model of inclusive governance that stunned the assembled dignitaries. During the coronation, Amenhotep, in a final desperate act of defiance, attempted to disrupt the ceremony, planning to incite a rebellion among the most conservative factions. But his own co-conspirators, realizing the tide had irrevocably turned against him, saw an opportunity for their own absolution. In a dramatic betrayal, they presented irrefutable evidence of his treasonous communications with foreign enemies, including detailed plans to destabilize the kingdom, and damning proof of his role in covering up historical murders. His dramatic arrest during the sacred rites of the coronation sent shockwaves through the Great Hall, providing satisfying justice for decades of manipulation and demonstrating the new regime's strength and unwavering legitimacy. He was sentenced to exile in the remotest desert oasis, a punishment chosen by Ankhesenamun herself, a gesture of mercy that signaled the beginning of a new, more compassionate reign. The story's resolution marked the true establishment of a new political order. Ankhesenamun's reforms swiftly began transforming Egypt into a more inclusive society. Former slaves were recognized as citizens, their rights protected by royal decree. Trade with Nubia flourished, bringing unprecedented prosperity to both lands. The palace, once a symbol of rigid hierarchy and oppression, was now a beacon of unity, a testament to the power of justice and compassion. The integration of mixed heritage nobles into the court created a vibrant new model of governance that valued diversity, cultural exchange, and merit over antiquated notions of blood purity. Captain Katie, his courage and loyalty unwavering, was elevated to a new, prestigious position as ambassador to Nubia. This role allowed him to serve both kingdoms, finding his own path to happiness and fulfillment as a crucial bridge between two peoples. His relationship with Ankhesenamun evolved into one of deep friendship and mutual respect, a bond forged in shared struggle and triumph. It was in Nubia that Katie eventually found true love, not with a pharaoh's queen, but with a vibrant Nubian princess named Zara, who appreciated his unique position and shared his passion for building bridges between cultures. Their union symbolized the lasting peace and mutual respect, now flourishing between Egypt and Nubia. All lingering mysteries found their just resolution. Yuya's murder was officially acknowledged, his memory honored in a solemn palace ceremony, and the truth of his sacrifice etched into the royal records. The original Princess Ankhesenamun was finally given a proper burial with full royal honors in a newly dedicated tomb, a monument to the history that had been buried and then rediscovered. Khimwaset, the meticulous keeper of secrets, was appointed royal historian, tasked with ensuring these truths were never again hidden, his life's work culminating in the accurate recording of history for future generations. And Queen Tiye, the silent architect of peaceful revolution, was publicly recognized as the visionary leader who had patiently sown the seeds of change, earning her an eternal place in history as a true mother of two nations. The final scenes unfolded with Ankhesenamun, now queen of a unified, transformed kingdom, standing on the palace balcony, implementing policies that would reshape Egypt for generations. Former slaves now worked as free citizens, their skills contributing to a vibrant economy. Trade caravans, once guarded by armed soldiers, now traveled freely between Egypt and Nubia, laden with goods and goodwill. The palace, once a symbol of oppression, was now a vibrant hub of unity. The establishment of new schools, teaching both Egyptian and Nubian history side by side, ensured that future generations would understand the value of cultural integration and the dangers of oppression, a legacy of enlightenment. As the sun, Ra, dipped below the horizon, painting the Nile in hues of fiery gold, Ankhesenamun stood on the royal balcony. She wore the double crown of Egypt and Nubia, a symbol of the unity she had forged with such courage. The pharaoh's gaze that once threatened her now belonged to her as well, reflecting a kingdom transformed by her will. Beside her stood Amenhotep, his hand resting gently on her back, his eyes filled with adoration and profound respect. Queen Tiye, her mission complete, offered a soft smile, and Ambassador Katie, a living embodiment of the new alliance, nodded in acknowledgement. Ankhesenamun had not only survived the machinations of the ancient world, she had transformed the very system that sought to destroy her, building a future where unity reigned supreme. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, a secret smile gracing her lips. Within her, a new life stirred, the ultimate promise for the future of the kingdom. The blood of queens flowed through her veins, and soon, a new generation, born of this revolutionary love and unity, would inherit a kingdom built on compassion rather than conquest, ensuring that her legacy, the crown of the Nile, would shine for eternity. 1 year, one short, precious year had flowed like the blessed Nile since the tumultuous festival of Opet, since the truth of the past had shattered the present, reshaping the very foundations of Egypt. A year since Ankhesenamun had stood on that sacred dais, not as a trembling slave, but as a queen in waiting, her voice ringing out the undeniable claim to a legacy long buried. And what a year it had been! The grand hall of the palace, once a stage for intrigue and veiled threats, now hummed with a different kind of energy. No longer was it merely a place of royal decrees and political maneuvering. It had become the heart of a vibrant, interconnected kingdom, a testament to the revolution born of love and truth. Ankhesenamun, now 21, moved through it with a serenity that spoke of deep contentment, her emerald eyes reflecting the peace she had helped forge. Her hand, often finding its way to her side, instinctively sought the small, warm presence cradled against her hip, Princess Nefertari. Born 5 months ago, she was the living embodiment of the new dawn. Her skin, a perfect blend of rich Egyptian bronze and the deeper Nubian ebony, glowed with health. Her eyes, the very same startling emerald as her mother's, sparkled with an infant's boundless curiosity, already hinting at the keen intellect that would one day challenge the world. Pharaoh Amenhotep III, now 46, looked at his daughter with a tenderness that still brought tears to Ankhesenamun's eyes. He had found not just a queen, but a true partner, a soulmate whose wisdom and passion had breathed new life into his weary heart. Their love, forged in the crucible of secrets and political fire, had deepened with each passing day, becoming an unbreakable bond, a quiet strength that underpinned the prosperity of their reign. "She has your fire, my love," Amenhotep would often whisper, watching Nefertari grasp for a sunbeam, her tiny fists clenching with determination. "And your eyes, the very eyes that captivated a pharaoh and changed a kingdom. Their hands would intertwine then, a silent promise, a shared gratitude for the destiny that had brought them together. Their love had not merely survived the passage of time, it had blossomed, reaching heights neither had ever dared to dream. The changes swept across Egypt like the fertilizing waters of the annual flood. The new kingdom, as it was now proudly called, was a tapestry woven with threads of unprecedented unity. The old, rigid class system, though not entirely dismantled overnight, was slowly yielding to a society that valued merit and contribution over birthright. Former slaves, now recognized as full citizens, swelled the ranks of craftsmen, farmers, and even scribes, their talents enriching every aspect of Egyptian life. The dreaded whip was replaced by the sound of hammers and chisels, building a future, not just monumental tombs for the dead. Trade with Nubia flourished, a vibrant exchange of goods and cultures that had transformed ancient rivals into trusted allies. Gold and exotic spices flowed freely from the south, while Egyptian grain and expertly crafted pottery ventured north. Ambassador Katie, now 26, had proven himself invaluable in this new era. He and his beautiful Nubian princess, Zara, were a beacon of this newfound cooperation. Their love story, celebrated in both courts, was a testament to the harmony that could exist between their peoples. Zara, with her sharp wit and diplomatic grace, was a perfect partner, not just for Katie, but for the delicate negotiations that smoothed over centuries of mistrust. Their new child, a robust son named Amun-Ra, was often seen in the palace, a testament to the merging of two proud cultures. Katie moved with a quiet joy. The conflict that had once tormented his soul now resolved, his purpose clear, his heart full. He had found his true home, not in assimilation, but in being a bridge. Kayemweset, now the revered royal historian, was often found poring over ancient texts in the great library, his weathered hands carefully transcribing the newly discovered truths. His life's work, once a clandestine act of resistance, was now the very foundation of the kingdom's understanding of its past. He ensured that the memory of Yuya, Ankhesenamun's noble father, was formally honored, his sacrifice recorded for posterity. The original Princess Ankhesenamun, whose tragic murder had set this grand destiny in motion, finally received a proper, dignified burial in a newly consecrated tomb, a sacred space where future generations could pay respects to the one whose spirit had never truly been lost. And Queen Tai, the magnificent architect of this peaceful revolution, now 72, moved with a grace that transcended age. Her eyes, always sharp, softened when she watched Ankhesenamun with Nefertari. Her legacy was not merely in the documents she had preserved, but in the living, breathing reality of a unified kingdom. She had patiently nurtured the seed of destiny, and now she watched it bloom into a garden of peace and prosperity. There was a quiet satisfaction in her gaze, the knowing look of one who had truly seen her life's purpose fulfilled. She had paid a price in a lifetime of carefully concealed secrets and lonely sacrifices, but the profound triumph she now witnessed was her ultimate reward. Not everyone, however, found such peace. High Priest Amenhotep, the architect of so much suffering, now withered in the harsh solitude of his desert exile. Stripped of his power, his ornate robes replaced by coarse linen, his days were spent in the desolate silence of the sands, haunted by the echoes of a kingdom he had tried to control and ultimately lost. The vastness of the desert, once a symbol of divine power, now mirrored the emptiness of his own defeat. He had paid the highest price for his ambition, utter irrelevance in the very world he had sought to dominate. Ankhesenamun's reforms continued to ripple through society. New schools, open to all, taught a curriculum that celebrated both Egyptian and Nubian history, philosophy, and art. The integrated army, led by generals who understood the strengths of both cultures, ensured a peace that felt as ancient and unyielding as the pyramids themselves. One evening, as the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in hues of fiery orange and soft violet, Ankhesenamun stood on the palace balcony. Princess Nefertari slept soundly in a cradle beside her, watched over by a devoted nurse. Pharaoh Amenhotep stood close, his arm around Ankhesenamun's waist, their gazes sweeping over the bustling city below, then out across the verdant ribbon of the Nile, and finally to the distant, shimmering sands of Nubia. Queen Tiye sat nearby, a gentle smile on her lips, and even Katie, back from a diplomatic mission, stood beside Zara, holding their young son. The pharaoh's gaze, that had once instilled fear and obedience, now belonged to her as well, transformed into a loving, watchful glance over a kingdom she adored. The Ankh birthmark on her shoulder, once a symbol of her obscured past, now pulsed with the warmth of life and the promise of the future. The little girl who had once stolen to survive in the dust of Thebes had become the guiding star of a new era. Her heart swelled with an emotion so profound it bordered on pain, the joy of purpose, the warmth of true love, and the quiet satisfaction of a destiny not just fulfilled, but surpassed. "Our dreams," Amenhotep murmured, his voice thick with emotion. They stretch as far as the eye can see, my queen, to the very ends of the world. Ankhesenamun leaned her head on his shoulder, her emerald eyes filled with a future that shone brighter than any gold. "No," she whispered, her voice soft but resonant, a queen's whisper. "They stretch to eternity, a legacy forged in love, etched in the very stones of time. And it has only just begun." Me, for in that silent, sacred moment, with the sun setting on one glorious day and rising on an even brighter tomorrow, Ankhesenamun knew that the crown of the Nile, now hers, was not merely a symbol of power, but the everlasting promise of a love that had defied all odds, a justice that had redeemed a kingdom, and a hope that would echo through the ages. Oh, what a journey we've shared, my friends! From the dusty streets of Thebes to the gleaming halls of a transformed empire, we've witnessed a love story that defied the very fabric of time and tradition. Ankhesenamun, the slave girl with emerald eyes and a queen's blood, taught us that destiny is not merely written in the stars, but forged in the crucible of courage, conviction, and an unwavering belief in justice. Her story is a resounding testament to the power of one heart to change the world. It shows us that even in the darkest of times, hope can rise like the morning sun over the Nile, and that the chains of oppression can be broken by the quiet strength of truth. It reminds us that love, in its purest form, is not about power or possession, but about respect, partnership, and the shared dream of a better future. And it dares us to believe that even the smallest whisper of justice can grow into a roar that shakes the foundations of empires. What an incredible saga of passion, betrayal, sacrifice, and triumph. Now, I want to hear from you. Comment your favorite moment from Ankhesenamun's epic journey. Was it her defiant gaze, meeting the pharaohs, Katie's courageous declaration, or perhaps the tender moment she held her daughter, the promise of a new age? And tell me, in her shoes, facing such impossible odds, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this sweeping tale of love, power, and justice captivated your heart as much as it did mine, please tag someone who loves epic historical romances and spread the word. And if you stayed with us until the very last moment, a true connoisseur of grand narratives, type destiny in the comments so I know who journeyed with us through every twist and turn. For those hungry for more stories that stir the soul and challenge the ages, be sure to check out the other captivating narratives I'm leaving for you in the cards. Until our next journey together, remember, some legacies are carved in stone, but the most powerful ones are etched in the hearts of those who dared to dream.